So by example, I literally took up autobiographically, and with some degree of accuracy, the difficulty we had deciding that we were quite comfortable with the mattress we had chosen after a great length of argument and debate. It wasn't we argued with each other, we argued with ourselves to figure out whether or not we were making the right decision. Because we would pay for it in back pain if we did. So I wrote the thing, I performed the thing at the end of the piece, and all the theoreticians were a little distressed. Because it seemed to suggest that my view of postmodernism had nothing to do with Guattari or Deleuze, that my view of it had to do with the culture being in a postmodern condition. And it wasn't that individual works are postmodern, because you can have some work that is a postmodern work because it addresses a postmodern cultural condition in a manner that seems appropriate to it, not derived from the manner of approaching classical late capitalist work. And it seemed to me that this distressed them because they're used to like having an idea that Beckett, postmodern, Joyce, modernist. What, are you kidding? Finnegan's Wake is a modernist work? Not in my world. It's a very strange anti-modernist, like, it's closer to my structuralist than it is to any of his earlier work. And it's also it's like a mad, nonsensical dream, as if some Alice in Wonderland character had dreamt it. And Finnegan's Wake is very lovable. It's a very different kind of book. But if Finnegan's Wake is a joyful postmodern work, Beckett's Kraft's Last Take is a negative one. And so you can have both kinds. The late Kafka, or which might turn out to be Beckett. Late Kafka might turn out to be Beckett. But it seems to me that we all have different views of postmodernism because we keep thinking that art works are postmodern. Art works are what they are, and they're being colored by a condition, by a cultural condition, I can imagine. In other words, if you say that Beckett is postmodern because it addresses a condition, well, what condition was it doing? It was written in the 1930s. I mean, Watt was written in the 1930s. What was postmodern about the 1930s? It seemed to me like a madly coded late modernist work, and a very brilliant one. Unless you begin using these terms to suppose that one thing is superior to another. In other words, being postmodern, does that make it better? What if what if you decide it's a late medieval work? Well, I feel more at home with certain late medieval works than I feel at home with certain contemporary works. I mean, Villon's a perfectly good example. Is Villon a postmodernist? The conditions of description actually would not make it hard to make a case. In other words, if it wasn't so patently absurd to call Villon a postmodernist, I could write an essay defending the argument that Villon was inherently a postmodern writer, as was also Montaigne. And I think I could make the claim that all the characteristics you're describing belong to that, but his condition was essentially the transition between a Renaissance cultural situation and a medieval situation, which were in collision with each other, and the pieces on both sides were crumbling. And in the midst of this crumble, it liberated a space for an artist who was buccaneering enough to really take it on. And that's what he was. He was a criminal confessing to criminality and exploiting bragging about his criminality, exaggerating it. Probably he was a trivial criminal, making believe he was a wicked or criminal. I mean, you have to take some of this with a grain of salt. Just because he claims to be a murderer doesn't make him one. Lots of people claim to be things they're not. Well, the truthfulness of these guys is always taken for granted by this guy like me. But I've learned that if you say something negative about yourself in a talk performance, everybody will believe it. It's a formula for belief. If you say something flattering about yourself, which I never do, the chances of it being doubted are much greater. So you understand that my Cervantes, my Montaigne, my Diderot is particularly, I keep regarding Diderot as a foster father. How can you do that? Well, he was a talk poet. His salons are nothing other than long talk pieces. conducted with writing, but Diderot is a master of progressive conversation. Everybody testifies to the way in which his friend Grimm said that he can't stay on a subject at all. He starts on one thing, he winds up with something completely different. I said, go, Jimmy, go, Jimmy. And I love the salons. They're incredibly funny. They're terribly witty. They're very glamorous. And his ability to write about art was astonishing. And of course, put down by Clement Greenberg as being not sufficiently academic. The same with Baudelaire. Although Diderot is freer, there's something about the freedom of Diderot that's incredible. The ability to turn on a dime and address another subject. Suddenly he's there. One of the things I found out was interesting, and I used to teach semiotics and history of art criticism in school, and I had a 19th century art criticism class. And the problem I had was the kids couldn't read any language but English. So they had read this essay by Diderot on, essentially on expressivity, really. He said, I have bizarre ideas about style. And he writes trying to argue that the organic appearance of a person whose features have been destroyed or ravaged by disease and operated upon them can be more beautiful than Helen of Troy. I think he invoked Helen of Troy earlier, maybe you maybe do that. But and what he's arguing for is the organicism of the repair to the face, and it's taking of itself together into a restored version of itself, however hideous it may appear, is an example of a high organic order that is really part of one's life. And what's interesting about it is, if you read the French, it's like Diderot sticking a knife into you and twisting, as you feel the pain of the person who's being described and the beauty that's being attributed to it in spite of all that. When you read the English, dead in the water, you feel nothing. I asked them about whether they found it gruesome. They said no. And I said, wait a minute, what are you reading? And they showed me what they were reading. You know, there's some way of doing a translation that destroys every value there is in the original. And what you do is you produce language that looks like it's correct, but it picks up the wrong set of connotations, it liberates the wrong set of connotations for the right words. And eventually, the wrong, it becomes a hideous translation, more hideous and less organic than the situation described by Diderot. And I went back and retranslated it for them, and I read them the passage. And one of the kids looked like he was going to get up and vomit. And I said, that's an appropriate response, God damn it. But there is in Diderot the ability to do something like that nobody would think of doing. He's an unthinkable critic. And the letters to his girlfriend are like other great performance works. Those crazy letters that, you know, like if you read them, you're reading a series of Shaggy Dog stories all the time. And so how can I not regard Diderot as unleashing art criticism? In its earliest phases, he unleashed the greatest art criticism we've ever had. Naturally, Greenberg didn't like his telling of stories. Go figure. What would Clem like? Greenberg is what I used to call a litmus paper critic. He'd go in front of an artwork, and if he turned blue, it was considered good. He once, Bill Agee, the director of the museum, Pasadena Museum at the time, was telling me a story about Clement Greenberg coming back from a tour of Japan. I said, how do you like it? He said, he said it was wonderful, this tour of Japan, because they took him around to all the museums and he told them which were the best ones. And so Bill Agee said, so what did they say? He said, they told me I was precisely correct. You can imagine the absence of irony in Clement Greenberg and the superb irony of the Japanese scholar saying, oh yes, it is just as you say. But sparkling character of Diderot is hard to believe, but the translations of Diderot are not good enough. You need someone who has a firecracker sense of style to be able to translate him. That's what makes him so deceptive, because it's colloquial and very precise. And he's a brilliant critic. But you can't get that precision out of most art. And he also, to use the word colloquial, he also bullshits a lot, where he's pretending to do something he's not doing. Like, he argues for a kind of classicism, which he never follows. There are lines of approach that are more or less considered appropriate for tragedy, appropriate for this, appropriate for that. But whenever he starts talking about something, if he gets into a kind of snafu about like what he's doing, he changes the genre. So he talks about artworks as literary, as if they were literary works. He talks about literary works as if they were paintings. And he's mercurial in his movements. Suddenly he invokes another thing. His ability to literally to go spinning through the piece for 25, 30 pages is really astonishing. So